This is the Food and Justice Podcast with Brenda Sanders.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Food and Justice. I'm Brenda Sanders, and I'm so excited for our guest today. I want to go ahead and read a little bit about Chloë so that you can get just as excited about her as I am. Chloë Waterman currently serves as the Senior Program Manager for Friends of the Earth's Climate Friendly Food Program, where she leads policy and markets campaigns to advance a healthy and climate-friendly food system. On Capitol Hill, in state houses, and across city governments, she has pioneered climate-friendly food procurement policies, initiatives to expand plant-based school meal offerings, and other policies to build a just and sustainable food system. Chloë previously served as the Senior Manager of State Legislative Strategy for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the ASPCA, where she successfully lobbied for a wide range of animal protection legislation and was instrumental in defeating pro-factory farming measures. Chloë holds a BA in Environmental Studies and Philosophy from Lewis and Clark College and a master's degree in Applied Economics from the University of Maryland. She currently resides in Prince George's County, Maryland, where she serves as co-chair for the Prince George's County Food Equity Council. She lives with her dog Jackal and a rotating cast of foster animals, and she can often be found gardening on her roof. Thank you so much, Chloë, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for having me. I'm such a fan of the work that you do and really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. Now, obviously, this entire show is going to be about Jackal, the foster animals, and your roof gardening.
So, yes, and he's ready. He put on his bow tie and everything.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, but I guess we'll talk about some other stuff first.
Sure.
Just to get started. I want to jump into the questions because this is a lot of the work that you're doing. I think that folks, especially our listeners, would be very excited about, but just may not know, that this important work is going on. And that's what Food and Justice is all about. Just like cracking open this food system and making sure that folks can learn the ins and outs of it. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing because, it's just at a level that that a lot of folks just aren't aware of. So can you tell us about the work that you're doing at Friends of the Earth?
Yeah, sure. So the campaign that I work on at Friends of the Earth, our goal is to enact a just transition away from factory farming toward a food system that is mostly plant-based foods, ideally grown organically and regeneratively, and then a sustainable amount of higher welfare, pasture-raised animal agriculture. So we want to end the factory farming system, and we do that through a few different strategies. So if you think about, you have two options of ending something. You have the supply side, you can cut off the supply or cut off the demand. And we have strategies working on both. So on the demand side, we are trying to reduce the institutional demand, especially from schools and from governments for factory farmed meat. So, Brenda, there was part of what accelerated our shift to renewable energy was the federal government purchasing renewable energy and saying, this is what we're going to buy. We're trying to do the same thing for our food system and get the federal government, state governments, and school districts especially to shift toward more plant-based foods. So that's one part of the work that I'm doing. And I especially do a lot of work on the school side, getting more access to plant-based options in schools, making it easier for schools to serve plant-based options in schools, just moving away from the very meat and dairy dominated menus that we have at most schools across the country. But then I also work on the supply side when it comes to factory farming. And one of the things that allows factory farming to flourish is the fact that there are so few regulations around it, and it benefits from so many government subsidies. So when consumers go to the store and they can buy, hot dogs for 99 cents, and, it's hard to blame somebody for buying hot dogs for 99 cents. You're trying to feed your family. But 99 cents is not the real cost of those hot dogs, right? We know that those hot dogs have an immense toll on the environment, on animals, of course, on the workers, on the communities that live near factory farms. And so those hot dogs are only able to be 99 cents because the government allows factory farming to essentially go unregulated. So part of my work is to change that and to require, the big factory farming companies, Smithfield, Tyson, to actually pay for the true costs, including the cost of communities and the cost of environment of producing that food, by subjecting them to regulations, similar to how the oil and gas industry is regulated, as well as to shift the way that the government is subsidizing, giving handouts and money to these industries instead of to the kind of industries that we want to see flourish, like, local, regional, plant-based agriculture.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for that work. I mean, I was appalled to find out that there was this regular practice within school lunchrooms here in Baltimore and probably in other cities too, where the children have to take a carton of milk. And there are even some places where before they can throw the milk away, they have to take a sip of
Wow.
Of the dairy milk before they can throw it away. And that just seems so unreal to me, especially since a lot of these schools are in marginalized communities where the populations of children tend to be lactose intolerant. So it's almost like a form of torture,
Yeah. That is one of the laws that just makes my blood boil. And it's so clear to me that that law is in place, not for the benefit of our children, but really for the benefit of the dairy industry. And, milk, cow's milk has a long and sordid history associated with colonization. And we continue to allow this policy that mandates, children to put cow's milk, which is not nutritionally appropriate, not culturally appropriate for so many kids, on their lunch trays. And right now, the current law requires students to actually get a note from a doctor saying that they have a disability in order to access a fluid milk substitute like soy milk. Obviously, that creates a huge barrier and a financial barrier that, again, is disproportionately going to affect low-income families who might not be able to see a doctor. And even if they did, a lot of doctors wouldn't say that lactose intolerance is a disability, because it's not. It's a genetic trait like left-handedness is. So that is something that really needs to change in our federal law. And we have been working with Congress to try to change that, to make it so that every student who has a note just from a parent should have the right to access an alternative to cow's milk that is nutritionally appropriate for them, and to allow schools to proactively provide soy milk to any student, whether you have a note or not. Any student should be able to go through the line and say, you know what, when I take the cow's milk, it makes my stomach hurt. So I'm going to take this soy milk that the dietary guidelines say is nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. But our laws are, really catered to the dairy industry, as they are in so many aspects of other areas of laws that I work in, where the industry has just had such enormous influence on U.S. policy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I wanted to ask you, with so many issues, and we both know there are so many issues that people can be focusing on, why should unsustainable food production be such a priority right now?
I think because of the way that it is connected to the core social justice issues of our time. So when you look at climate change, animal agriculture is one of the biggest drivers of climate change. In this country, it is actually the top source of methane emissions, which is a greenhouse gas that is about 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And it's one of those greenhouse gases that we actually could reduce really rapidly in the atmosphere and be able to get over this hump. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this preeminent global authority on climate change, has said, we have 8 years left, something like that, in order to avert the very worst impacts of climate change. So if we don't do these short-term actions, like rapidly reducing methane from our atmosphere, we're not going to make it over that hump. And that's kind of that point of no return, where we are really looking at a dystopian crisis. And so that's one reason, if you care about climate, you care about future generations, there's one reason to focus on it. I think the second that I would point to is public health, and specifically around racial health disparities. I think the pandemic really underscored how important healthy diets are, because we saw that people who had pre-existing health conditions were far more vulnerable to hospitalization and death resulting from COVID. COVID did surpass things like heart disease and hypertension and diabetes as the top killer in the United States during those years, but usually that title is earned by heart disease, which is often a diet-related disease that can be prevented through a healthy, plant-based or plant-forward, daily whole food diet. So if we want to, have our parents and grandparents living long and healthy lives, and our kids coming after them living long and healthy lives, then shifting our diets toward more plant-based foods is such an important tool to prevent some of the greatest killers, again, in our country, which again, disproportionately impact people of color. And that's one of the reasons why, to me, school food is such an important intervention, because school food also disproportionately serves students of color. And so if we teach those healthy eating habits at a young age, they can lead to, a healthier generation, really, of our children. And then the third reason is for the communities that live near factory farms and that work in our food system. Mm-hmm. To start with the communities, the conditions that folks who live near CAFOs describe is just unbelievable. Things like not being able to go outside your own house because the stench is so horrible, not being able to hang by a dryer because if you hung your clothes out to dry, they would smell just unbearable. Things like not being able to drink your own water in your own home or from your own well because of the contamination. Not being able to use, your waterways, and getting, conditions like asthma and cancer and other conditions that are showing up at much higher rates in communities that are living near factory farms where animals are being raised for food. So if you care about environmental justice, if you care about, making sure that everybody has the right to a livable, bearable life, then factory farms don't have a place in that. And similarly for, workers, the workers at slaughterhouses, which are necessary for this industry, we have to have slaughterhouses, we have to have slaughterhouse workers. Those are some of the most dangerous jobs in the country, with some of the highest rates of injury. And those jobs are disproportionately held by folks of color as well, and especially immigrants and migrants who, sometimes have fewer rights than naturalized citizens of the U.S. do, making them even more vulnerable to the abuses of these companies to workers. So I think you can pick your social justice issue. So if you care about public health, if you care about racial justice, environmental justice, if you care about climate change, I think all roads lead to having to address this issue.
Wow. I mean, you just summed that up so succinctly, and I appreciate that. And CAFOs, of course, stand that is an abbreviation for concentrated animal feeding operations, right?
Exactly. Yes. Or, factory farms, what most people would call factory farms.
All right. So, and then we saw a lot of violations of worker rights during the pandemic, especially, and these workers being forced back into very unsafe conditions. So, with all the buzz around unions and worker rights right now, I think that this is an important issue to bring to the forefront as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was unbelievable what happened during COVID, but I think it also highlighted that these conditions are persisting throughout. We have laws in this country that exempt agricultural workers from minimum wage laws and paid sick leave laws, which all made things worse. And those laws are a direct vestige of slavery, but they still perpetuate, again, in our legal system, in our politics today. So we have to we can't just, call food and farm workers heroes. We have to treat them as essential workers as well. And that means, providing them a fair wage, livable wage, benefits, especially paid sick leave. We don't want our food and farm workers having to choose between coming to work when they're sick or taking time off without pay. So that's something that I think the pandemic really underscored. We need to change in our policy the way we're valuing our food and farm workers.
Food and Justice is made possible with support from Defund Big Meat, a grassroots effort to encourage strategic collaboration across all sectors of global justice. Find more information about Defund Big Meat at defundbigmeat.org. A Well-Fed World, an international hunger relief and food justice organization advancing plant-based foods and farming to create a nourished and climate-friendly future. Find out more about A Well-Fed World at awfw.org. Better Food Foundation, an organization that promotes dietary changes to build a healthy, equitable, humane, and environmentally sustainable food system. You can find out more about Better Food Foundation at betterfoodfoundation.org. And Farm Sanctuary, a farmed animal sanctuary working to fight the disastrous effects of animal agriculture on animals, the environment, social justice, and public health through rescue, education, and advocacy. Find out more about Farm Sanctuary at farmsanctuary.org.
So you have talked a little bit about some of the current legislation that you're working on. Can you talk about a little bit more about that legislation, both at the state and federal level, and how it's being received, especially?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start at the federal level. So we've been working with a coalition of organizations over the past couple of years on legislation called the Healthy Future Students and Earth Act, which is a federal bill. It's, I think, the first federal bill to even use the words plant-based that would create a new $10 million grants program for school districts to expand their plant-based offerings. So we discovered, through our research that we did an analysis of menus in California schools and found that only 4% of the options being offered, the entrees, were plant-based. And half of those were nut butter and jelly. So we are just not seeing at all. And that's contrasted with really expanded student demand for these practices. But school food operators face a lot of financial and technical barriers in expanding the plant-based options that they're serving. And this bill seeks to overcome that by giving them the funding that they need to, whether it's for technical assistance, to train their chefs, to pay their chefs for more hours, because sometimes the ingredients for plant-based can cost less, but the labor to produce it can cost more. So making sure that schools are equipped to have the resources they need to expand plant-based options. So that has been received, I think, pretty well on Capitol Hill. I mean, on the one hand, we have gotten 37 co-sponsors of the bill, 37 members of Congress to say, yes, not only will I support this bill, but I'm really going to back it. I think this is a great idea. But at the same time, all of those offices are Democrats. And so it is a little bit of a sad state where this issue, which is really around, student choice, giving students the right to have, culturally appropriate food, whether it's because of their religion, because of their culture, because of the ethical beliefs they hold, because they're trying to be healthier, or whatever reason it is, to give them the right to have those choices. But we, have had a harder time getting support from the Republican side of the aisle on this policy. So that part has been disappointing, but it has been good to see. I think the Biden administration has created some windows of opportunity for aspects of the Healthy Future Students and Earth Act to be pushed forward, perhaps even without Congress. For example, the USDA is revising its meal patterns, its nutrition guidelines that govern school meals later this year. This will be our best chance for the next 7 years to influence the nutrition standards for what's served in our schools and to really help facilitate plant-based and plant-forward menus. So there are still important advocacy opportunities, whether or not, the Healthy Future Student Center Act moves forward in Congress through the House and the Senate. And especially, if we do have a Republican Congress next year, we do still have a Democratic president. And then at the state level, it's been mixed, so I'll give you kind of a tale of two jurisdictions. So working on this, I started working about 5 years ago on a bill in Maryland, the state where both of us live, on legislation to require the state to set a goal of reducing the emissions associated with the food the state purchases for, state prisons, for state healthcare institutions, employee cafeterias, and public universities. So they would do that. They would meet this goal of shifting toward more plant-based options and reducing food waste to get a reduction in emissions of 25% by 2030. And initially, actually, we made good progress doing this with the agency that oversaw food purchasing in Maryland. But then the Cattlemen's Association heard about the effort from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and they wrote a letter to Governor Hogan saying, these radical groups are trying to ban beef from the state of Maryland, which was not at all true. And Governor Hogan shut the project down. He stopped that work mid-project. So Maryland, has an election right now. We may end up with a Democratic governor who would be willing to pursue this policy, but that just shows, in Maryland, we really had to combat that industry opposition, and we kept working for a few more years. The Farm Bureau would, really oppose the bill. Even after they came to compromises with us, they would renege on those compromises and kill the bill in the second chamber, really playing dirty. But to give a brighter example, in the District of Columbia, just over the border, we worked with Councilmember Che to pass DC's Green Food Purchasing Act, which does exactly what I just described. It sets a goal for the District of Columbia, including DC public schools, to reduce emissions by 25% by 2030. And the Farm Bureau, the Cattlemen's Association, they don't work in DC because we don't have those industries in the District of Columbia. And so you can see when the industries aren't involved, it has a much more clear political path. And that bill passed unanimously. And DC is working on implementing that legislation now. So that's to end on a little bit of a brighter note. And I think, for folks listening at home too, think about your city. Is this something that your city council members might want to do? There's nothing that would stop any city from deciding to shift its own purchasing toward more plant-based foods as a climate and public health measure.
That is so exciting. I got chills when you were talking about how it passed unanimously. I mean, that is the work. That is the work. And it's like, there are so many, I don't know, I want to say losses, but setbacks that can happen. And then when you have these kinds of wins, it just kind of, I don't know, energizes you.
Feeds your soul. I can't keep going. Yes.
Absolutely. And I do want to get back to, I know folks are going to hear this show and want to know what they can do, how they can get involved. It's just so exciting. So we're definitely going to make sure that we talk about that before we wrap things up. I found it really interesting that in addition to animal agriculture, you also address pesticide intensive industrial plant agriculture. And I don't hear that much. And I think that we should hear it a lot more because there are a lot of pesticides being used right now in agriculture. And so I wanted to ask you to explain more about why this is a concern and what is being done to address it.
Yeah, sure. And just to, link this back, because I know, Brenda, a lot of your listeners are more focused on animal agriculture. And, pesticides are used to feed crops that are then fed to animals. That causes a huge amount of pesticide use in this country, which is harming our soil. It's harming our pollinators. We have declining bee populations, and that's, one of the theories for the way that the world ends is we run out of bees. So we have to take that really seriously and protect the health of our pollinators. And pesticides are harmful to humans as well. These pesticides get into our bodies. Friends of the Earth has done some research that found that, even just eating a fully organic diet for a short period of time can flush the pesticides out of people's bodies. But these pesticides are getting into our bodies through the food that we're eating. So we also want to make it more possible for people to purchase and for farmers to grow organic food. Organic is really both, it's a climate solution and it's a direct health solution. We're seeing just huge rises in the rates of cancer, and you look at birth defects, especially among farm workers who are working the fields where they're really working with the pesticides every day. These are really dangerous jobs, and so moving away from this pesticide intensive system that we're mostly monocropping, meaning we're growing one crop over a huge amount of land. That's not good for the soil to do it that way. We have estimates that say we have maybe 40 years of nutrients in our soil left unless we change the way that we farm, so that we're farming in a way that puts nutrients back in the soil, which is how we used to do it in the old days. So that using these vast swaths of land to grow food for animal feed and also for fuel. The US actually has of the cereals that we grow in this country, only 11% go to human consumption, which is less than in China and Germany and the UK and Chad and Nigeria. We are just growing so much food that doesn't actually get fed to humans. So we really need a shift in our agriculture so that we are growing food that humans can actually eat. And that shift will also facilitate a reduction in pesticides if we couple it with that shift to organic agriculture as well.
Oh my goodness. I mean, this is like world-changing information. Because I've been eating plants for almost, this year will be 25 years that I've been 100% plant-based, and I've always found organic food to be inaccessible.
Yeah.
It's been so far out of my reach for almost this entire time, and it just shouldn't be that way. Something that it will help facilitate good health should not be so far out of the same folks' reach who are being marginalized in so many other ways. It's a travesty. So
exactly, and that's our campaign, is organic for all. We think everyone should have the right to organic food, and it's really our policies that are needed to shift that. Hopefully we're moving in the right direction. Actually, just today, Secretary Vilsack announced that the USDA will be spending $300 million to help farmers transition to organic production.
Wow.
So there are positive things that are happening out there, and more, it can be a costly endeavor to transition to organic. So having the government be able to assist farmers financially and with technical assistance to make that transition is going to be really important to get organic food to show up at every grocery store in Baltimore, which is what we want to happen.
Yes, my goodness, Friends of the Earth. How can one organization be doing so much good work? I mean, people need to know about you and about Friends of the Earth
I appreciate that, Brenda.
It's amazing.
All of this work is coalition work, though, too. We have so many close partners and allies that we work with to do this work. There's so much working against us that we have to be united as a movement. We have to figure out where are the places where we can link arms and push for our shared vision. So we do a lot of work with, allies of our organization, our membership, individual activists as well.
Thank goodness. And I'm so appreciative. I mean, your work makes my work possible. So, and hopefully
vice versa. Okay. Because if nobody knows about our work, then it doesn't really do that much. So
Awesome. So, speaking of these issues not being prioritized, why do you feel that these issues are not being prioritized to the degree that we know that they should be by elected officials, the media, even some environmental organizations.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, this is something I really struggle with because I'm like on the top of the mountain being like, everyone must pay attention to this. It's one of the most important things. I think that one of the things we're up against is that industry influence that I alluded to earlier. Um, the lobbying organizations for industrial farming are huge, and they're so connected to other industries as well. Like, a lot of people know that the pharmaceutical lobby is a huge lobby, but the pharmaceutical lobby is really deeply invested with the animal agriculture lobby because 80% of our antibiotics go to farmed animals. 80% of their antibiotic sales are going there. So they're invested in it. The oil and gas industry are quite invested in it as well. Like I just mentioned earlier, so much of our agriculture system is going to grow feed crops to create fuel. And increasingly, the USDA, and this is a really bad thing, is looking at factory farms as a source of factory farmed methane gas to then contribute to our fossil fuel system. So you now have the fossil fuel companies. You have, for example, in North Carolina, a partnership between Smithfield, the big hog producer, and a fossil fuel company with the goal of connecting more of the factory farm infrastructure to fossil fuel infrastructure and be able to ultimately burn gas generated from waste from factory farming. And so the power of these industries is really, really extreme. And I think that they're also able to hide behind kind of the veneer of the farmer. What happens is the industry will hide behind that kind of bucolic image of, the farmer in the red barn. And Americans really trust farmers as messengers, but it's really, these massive companies, the JBSs, the Tyson, Smithfield, Cargill, that we're saying, oh, you get a free pass. We don't want to regulate or put any requirements on farmers. And they're using farmers as a front, basically, to kind of hide behind. But really, we have to regulate these massive, corporate entities that are fueling the harms in the industrial agriculture system that we're suffering from. So I think that's a huge reason. And then I think diet is really personal to people, and you have to approach this issue in a way that doesn't, cast anybody as doing the right thing or the wrong thing. You're not a bad person. Most people, as you know, are meat eaters. So if you approach a policymaker, more likely than not, they're going to be a meat eater themselves. And so framing these issues in a way that is accessible to them around, reducing the harms, reducing the impact, I think hopefully we'll start to be more successful with having folks kind of see that we need this, policy and systemic change. But, we have a huge kind of don't touch my hamburger culture in the US that we have to, figure out ways to work around.
Absolutely. It is such a delicate topic. I mean, food in general is just it can be so frictious and
right.
And I'm even at the community level having to sort of navigate through that and make sure that we are meeting people where they are, working with them from that space, and then just providing support and encouragement as opposed to pointing fingers and, making people feel bad. I mean, guilt just doesn't work. We've tried it. We've all tried it. It doesn't work. So we have to find something that does.
The Food and Justice Podcast is proud to be organizational partners with Afro-Vegan Society, Food Empowerment Project, Grow Where You Are, and Vine Sanctuary.
You've been talking about the plant-based diet, and I talk about the plant-based diet a whole lot in my work, and certainly encourage people to eat plant-based foods. Lots of folks have gone through our programs here in Baltimore and gotten the resources and support that they need to start to just kind of transition into eating more plants where they are. So if it's the corner store, then we're gonna, try to get you access to as much plant-based food as possible at the corner store, and just bring as much education into communities as possible. Do you, in your work, feel that there is resistance to promoting a transition to plant-based foods? I mean, I work in a lot of like community level social justice, sort of food justice arenas, and I can tell you there is a whole lot of resistance. But I won't talk about that. We'll talk about you and your work. Do you think that there is a lot of resistance to promoting transition to plant-based foods? And like, what does that resist? What do you think is behind that resistance?
Well, so Friends of the Earth as an organization doesn't advocate for individual diet shift just because of our theory of change as an organization. So we believe that people will shift their diets if the policies facilitate that. So, I mentioned those 99-cent hot dogs earlier. Like if those hot dogs actually reflected the true cost of that meat, and then if you had, your veggie alternatives to those, your chickpea patties, say, reflecting their true cost on the environment, you're going to see the price of chickpea patties drop, and you're going to see the price of a hot dog increase. And so policies can really facilitate that, especially when you're looking at food service at the institutional level. And that's one of the big reasons we focus on schools. Because when you're a kid, you don't have a choice about what's served at school, but you have a choice about what you eat. So can we get schools to use their power? I mean, there are more school cafeterias in this country than there are Starbucks and Subways combined. And so if we can shift the food in those institutions toward more plant-based, I believe there's a lot of people who would be willing and ready to make that shift if we as a society made it easier for people to make those choices. So you, Brenda, mentioned the corner stores, and with a lot of corner stores, a lot of the same thing with dollar stores and Dollar Generals, which have been displacing full service grocery stores in a lot of communities, especially rural communities around the country. That's putting a barrier toward people to getting more plant-based options in their life. If those stores had, prepackaged salads ready to go that were affordable for people to have, if they had the ingredients for making, easy plant-based dishes at home. And then you can take this really far too. If we paid our workers enough so that, people had enough time to go to cook and prepare meals and learn how to do that, and were paid a decent wage so that they could afford to buy the foods that are right for their families. So I think that I know what you mean. And I've had a lot of those conversations on a personal level with folks that are just resistant to make that change. But I feel like I've had more conversations with folks that are like, yeah, I would love to eat more plant-based foods. I just need it to be easier. I want it to be the default. So I think if we start to flip that script, we will find that we don't necessarily have to convince people one by one, plant-based is good versus meat is bad or anything like that. We can just make plant-based the default, make healthy and plant-based the easy choice for people to make.
Absolutely. My goodness, you are speaking my language.
I know that is the work that you do. Yeah,
it is, because one of the things that people don't take into consideration when they're doing this food justice work is that time is a resource that low-income people don't have enough of, and not to mention, just like the economics of it all, right? But people don't take into consideration that folks who are working 2 jobs, I mean, when I was growing up, my mother often had 3 jobs, just to make ends meet. And she certainly wasn't going home and, like putting together some elaborate plant-based meal, even though she may have wanted to. There just aren't enough hours in a day. And so we do need to change things at the systemic level. Exactly. In order to start to see things change. So again, thank you for that work. My goodness.
And back at you.
Yes. So you're also, as I mentioned when I was reading your bio, you're also the co-chair of Prince George's County, Maryland's Food Equity Council. And I just love that name. because, equity is where we want to get to. Right now, we know that things are not equitable. Well, hopefully, hopefully
Yes.
people aren't still in the dark about the fact that, there are racial disparities, there are economic disparities that exist within the food system. And so I wanted to know more about the work that you're doing with the council and what you seek to accomplish there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I when I first moved to Prince George's County 5 years ago and found out about the FEC, I had the same reaction as you. I love that. I love that they're focusing on food equity. And the mission of the Prince George's Food Equity Council is for every Prince Georgian to have the right to healthy, culturally appropriate, and affordable food. And so we have a variety of policies and programs that we promote to make that happen. So we try to work with the residents who are most vulnerable, who are most likely to live either in, what some people call a food desert, or they can be called a food swamp, filled with unhealthy food, but not so much healthy options, to figure out programs that will support those folks and policies. During the pandemic, we did a lot of work providing support to food assistance providers, helping to coordinate that response, which ultimately should be a government function. The government should be the entity to step in a crisis and make sure that everybody's fed. But we don't live in that world yet. That's the world, that's the county at least, that we're fighting for here in Prince George's. So we established a food security task force. The county council established a food security task force that our director helped to serve on, that came up with a list of recommendations for how to expand not just food security, also but nutrition security. Some of the things that I've worked on with the council are trying to shift the county's procurement, the food the county is purchasing, to be more aligned with the county's values. And specifically right now, we're working on a campaign with an organization called PG Changemakers that is trying to change the food that is served in our county jail. Food in jails, that this is one of my passion projects, because I think that it is one of the worst human rights violations that we have in this country. If you look at the quality of food being served to people who are incarcerated, it's truly unacceptable, with reports, regular reports of people being fed food that is not fit for human consumption when they're incarcerated. So if part of our mission is to make sure that every Prince Georgian has access to this food, that includes Prince Georgians who are incarcerated. And because of our unjust legal system, that is disproportionately Black folks in our county. And so figuring out how do we get into the jail system, make sure plant-based options are available, but also just increase the quality of the food. Instead of those, canned, sugar-added fruits and vegetables, let's get some fresh fruits and vegetables. It's again, going back to what we were talking about earlier. If you make it easy to eat healthy, if you provide those options, a lot of people are really eager to do that, and they're going to choose it. So that's another campaign that I'm really excited about in the county, and especially if any of your listeners are in Prince George's County and want to work with PG Changemakers on that campaign, we'd love to bring more folks into the fold there.
My goodness. That is, that's also a sort of a fight that's close to my heart as well. I was not aware of how bad the food system was in the prisons. I mean, you kind of figure that because these are folks that are, right, not going to be as considered in society, that it wouldn't be great. But I was doing some research. I actually had a show specifically about the food and the prison system with Kanav Kathuria.
Oh, great.
From the organization Maryland Food and Prison Abolition Project. And I mean, the things that he revealed, that was in season 1, but the things that were revealed about this food, like in quotes, because I was just heartbroken.
I felt the same way. And it was largely kind of research that inspired me on a personal level to try to get more involved with this. The work that I'm doing with Prince George's County is just, it's in a volunteer capacity, not necessarily, though it's aligned also with the mission of Friends of the Earth. But it's just, I'm so glad that he uncovered that and did that research into what's happening, but we still have so far to go to get our policymakers to see that and to actually make changes in the food that's being served both in state prisons and also in our county jails.
Yes. And since you clearly don't sleep, I think we're well on our way to making a difference in this area. Thank you again for that work that you're doing. My goodness. So, okay. Now that people know all these things and all these projects and about all these issues, now they want to do something. I just know it. You know, these are great people who are listening to my show and watching it on YouTube. And so they want to know, like, what can I do? So what would you tell, or what do you tell the average person that they can do to support policies that promote sustainable food and regulate unsustainable food production?
Sure thing. So I think the first step, and I bet a lot of your listeners have already done this step, but is know who represents you. And know at every level. Know, I would, write this down, put it on your fridge and put these people's numbers, on your fridge so that anytime you hear about an issue that's affecting your city, your county, your state, a federal issue, you have that number handy to call and ask your elected official to do what they were elected to do, which is represent you by making your voice heard on these issues. So figure out who's your city councilman who represents you, or, you might have multiple. Who's your mayor? What's their number? Do you have a county council person? Do you have a county commissioner, a county executive? Get their numbers. State level, if you're in Maryland, you're going to have, one senator, and you might have 1, 2, or 3 delegates. So figure out, look up. You go mdelect.net for folks in Maryland, who represents you. And then at the federal level, who are your 2 senators representing your state and your member of Congress. A lot of people know their federal folks, but not necessarily their state and local. And all of them are so important on these issues. So I'd say for your local folks, the bills that we were talking about earlier, Brenda, that would shift city or county's procurement toward more plant-based foods, that would be a great issue for folks to pick up the phone and say, hey, can we set a goal? Can we track, here in Baltimore or wherever, how much of the food that we're purchasing as a city is contributing to climate change, and reduce that, set a measurable target to reduce that, which would be achieved by shifting to more plant-based foods, which of course also has these co-benefits for health. That's something that a city council member can, introduce legislation to do that. Your mayor could issue an executive order that just sets that goal and moves that policy forward. And you can, send them DC's policy as an example. You could do something even later. You could ask them to implement a default veg policy. So for meetings and events that are catered, flip the script. Instead of asking people, would you want a vegetarian option at this catered event? The default is a plant-based option, and people could opt into having meat. Those policies work well because you can't really oppose it very well, because people still have the choice to choose meat, but it's using, behavioral psychology. So get involved at your local level, find out who else in your community is interested in this, team up with folks. If you have a food policy council, reach out to the food policy council, which y'all do in Baltimore, we do in Prince George's County. And find some folks to team up with. And then for the federal level, I will plug again the Healthy Future Students in Earth Act that we've been mentioning. Folks can call their member of Congress, their U.S. representative, and ask their U.S. representative to co-sponsor the bill if they're not on the bill already. So the bill number is HR 4108. And it's called the Healthy Future Students in Earth Act. So folks can call in and say, I'm a constituent. I learned about the Healthy Future Students in Earth Act. I would love to see a member of Congress sponsor this. And then the last thing that I'll add is that if folks want to get even more involved, if you want to have a meeting with your member of Congress, if you want to, volunteer to do more advocacy on these issues, feel free. I'll share my email with you, Brenda, and folks can feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm at cwaterman@foe.org. So if folks are like, I'd love to meet with my legislator, but I'm not sure, how to go about doing that. Who do I ask to meet with? We're happy to help walk folks through those steps. One of my favorite things about my job is getting to connect people with their elected officials and giving people that feeling of empowerment of having their voice heard by the people that are in power to make the changes to enact the world that person wants to see. So I'd be happy to connect with any of your listeners that want to get into it a little bit deeper as well.
And that's so amazing that you love doing that work, because that is, I think, one of the barriers for folks, just, average everyday folks is just like, oh, what do I do? And just not knowing which steps. I mean, you're giving websites, places where people can search, and like you're giving out your email. I mean, you might be a superhero. I'm not sure.
Well, it definitely doesn't feel that way. But, this is not an issue. We are up against so much on these issues, that our opposition, how well moneyed they are, how integrated they are into our political and economic system. The only way that we're going to win is through building grassroots power. And so I could not do this without people that are in communities leveraging, their peers to build support with members of Congress to change these policies. Like, it's definitely not something that Friends of the Earth or any other organization can do alone. So people can make a huge difference when it comes to changing our policies.
Yes, and I cannot wait. I mean, this is just such a great show, and just so chock full of information and inspiration. And I cannot wait for it to air and for folks to get this information and get motivated and mobilized to do something. So thank you so much again, Chloë, for being on the show. It's been amazing. I've learned, I was sitting here taking notes. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm so thankful that you took the time to do the show.
Oh, Brenda, thank you so much. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the work that you do and the way that you connect social justice and food justice issues to the movement for plant-based. It's really an inspiration to me, and I know to so many other people. So it's an honor to get to be on your show and have this time together.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the folks for tuning in. I know that, this has been a great experience for you as well. And tune in again next week for the next show. Everybody, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Food and Justice with Brenda Sanders. See you next time.